In Vicksburg, they still whisper of a woman who never aged, a face that returned every generation, unchanged, uninvited, waiting for its next reflection. Some say she isn't dead at all, only trapped in the glass, watching for someone to recognize her. At the far edge of the Mississippi Delta, where the river's breath turns the air thick as syrup, there stands a house that should have fallen long ago. The locals call it times the Mirror House asterisk. Its shutters hang like half-closed eyes, its porch leans into the soil as though the earth itself is reclaiming what was never meant to last. Kudzu climbs its columns, swallowing the carved initials of a name no one says aloud anymore, **S. Aldridge, 1859. ***. The boards creak when wind passes through, but no one claims to have heard it from inside, only the faint echo of something older than silence. The story begins here, on a road few travel after dark, where the house waits behind a curtain of moss and shadow. Children are warned not to wander near it. They say if you peer through its windows at dusk, you'll see candlelight flicker in rooms empty for a century. Some swear they've seen movement, a woman in white gliding past the parlor mirror, her face clear but unfamiliar. Others insist that's nonsense, that the only thing in those halls is rot and dust. But the records tell a stranger truth. The land once belonged to Silas Aldridge a man who rose from obscurity to wealth almost overnight. Before the war, his plantation thrived when others starved. He was a cotton baron of rare fortune, though his fortune never quite felt earned. Neighbors described him as gracious but peculiar, his voice soft, his eyes unreadable. He kept to himself, save for one habit that became legend. Every few years, he took a new wife. In a place and time where death came easily, that fact alone might not have been remarkable. But what made the Aldridge story impossible to ignore were the portraits. Each bride, painted by a different hand across decades, bore the same face, the same pale eyes, the same slight turn of the mouth, as if caught between breath and silence. When visitors asked after the uncanny resemblance, Silas would smile faintly and say, "I have a type." But the neighbors whispered otherwise. They said his wives did not die, they disappeared. That the fields behind his house were seeded not only with cotton, but with the bones of women who shared one body and one curse. Some believed he found a way to preserve them, to freeze beauty in repetition, like pressing a flower between glass. Others said he simply buried each and began again. The Mirror House still stands where the delta bends. Its windows hold reflections that do not belong to the present, and its halls remember more footsteps than time should allow. The paint has long peeled, the roof sags, but at sunset, the upper window still glows faintly, as though lit by the hand of a woman whose face no longer belongs to the living. It began, as these things often do, not with discovery but with coincidence. In the spring of 2021, an archivist named Lydia Crane was cataloging a collection of deteriorating tintypes for the Vicksburg Historical Society images salvaged from abandoned trunks, family attics, and estate sales. Most were ordinary relics of a vanished South: stern men in uniform, women seated stiffly in lace, children frozen mid-blink. But one caught her eye immediately. A young woman in a high-collared dress sat before a painted backdrop of a cotton field. Her gaze was calm, almost serene, but there was something in it, an awareness uncommon in photographs from the 1850 seconds. The back of the metal plate bore a single inscription, hand-etched and faint from age. Mrs. Aldridge, 1859. At first, Lydia thought little of it. The name was familiar, part of local legend, but legends rarely intersect with the tangible. Still, she filed the plate under Time's unverified family portraits asterisk, scanning it for preservation. The digital copy only deepened her unease. The longer she stared, the more alive the woman seemed. Her pupils caught the light like wet glass. Her expression hovered somewhere between invitation and warning. Lydia adjusted the contrast and saw a reflection in the edge of the woman's locket, a shape too symmetrical to be accidental, like a second face caught just out of frame. 2 weeks later, a donation arrived from a private collection in Natchez, a set of tintypes rescued from a fire. Among them, Lydia froze again. The label read Times Mrs. Aldridge, 1863. Asterisk. The same woman stared from the plate. Same eyes, same half-smile, same locket. But the style of her dress belonged to another decade. The metal showed less wear, as though age itself refused to touch her. Lydia compared the images side by side. The features aligned perfectly. Every contour, every freckle. It wasn't resemblance, it was replication. She brought the discovery to her supervisor, who dismissed it as a copy or mistaken labeling, but Lydia continued digging. 2 nights later, while cataloging an unrelated collection from Yazoo County, she found another photograph. Asterisk Mrs. Aldridge, 1871. Asterisk. The same face once more, unchanged by 12 years or by mortality. Yet this image was different. The background was the interior of a parlor, its mirror uncovered. Behind the seated woman stood a figure blurred by exposure. When Lydia magnified the frame, her breath caught. The reflection in the mirror showed not 2 figures, but 3. The archivist began to wonder whether history had captured something it wasn't meant to hold. And for the first time in her long career surrounded by ghosts of the past, Lydia Crane realized that some photographs don't preserve memory, they wait for it. The Vicksburg courthouse is not a place that encourages superstition. Its halls smell of paper and dust, its ledgers kept in neat chronological rows stretching back before the war. Yet in one of those brittle books, under the flicker of a single bulb, Lydia Crane found what local rumor had never proven: 12 separate marriage certificates, all signed by the same man. Asterisk asterisk Silas W. Aldridge. Asterisk asterisk. The handwriting was careful, almost calligraphic, as if the act of record itself carried reverence. Each entry bore a different date: 1842, 1847, 1851, and on, spanning nearly 40 years. But it was the bride's names that stopped her. Eliza Thorne, Liza Thorne, Elise Thorne, Lisbeth Thorne. The variations blurred together like a single word repeated too often until meaning dissolved. Each signature looked slightly off, as though written by the same hand trying to imitate itself. No witnesses were listed. No fathers gave consent. The officiants changed, yet the pattern never did. A wedding every few years, always in spring, always to a woman with the same name said differently. Lydia flipped back through the pages, tracing the ink with a trembling finger. The early entries had been written with quill and ink, the later ones with pen, but the strokes shared something uncanny, the same pressure, the same rhythm of hesitation before the bride's name. She took notes, copied dates, and cross-referenced the census rolls for each corresponding year. There was no record of any of these women ever being born in Mississippi or anywhere else. No death certificates. No graves in the churchyard plots where Aldridge's name appeared among donors. It was as if each wife had entered existence the moment she signed the ledger, and ceased once her ink dried. Archivists learn to dismiss coincidences. Names repeat, records falter, pages are rewritten. Yet 12? Over 37 years? The odds defied reason. Lydia began searching newspaper archives and found brief notices of each wedding, always phrased identically, as if printed from a template. Mr. Silas Aldridge of Vicksburg was united in matrimony to Miss Eliza, or Liza, or Elise, Thorne. No family mentioned, no descriptions of ceremony or guests, no announcements of death or widowhood to follow. At night, she dreamed of the names written over and over, identical but decaying, the letters unraveling like threads in a tapestry. She woke to the feeling that repetition itself was a kind of ritual, that Silas Aldridge had been practicing marriage the way some men practice prayer obsessively, faithfully, until the distinction between devotion and madness vanished. And when she returned to the courthouse the next morning, she noticed something she hadn't before. In the margin beside the final entry, faint and written in ink nearly faded to nothing, were two words, asterisk, the same, asterisk. Before the war, asterisk, asterisk, Silas Aldridge, asterisk, asterisk, was the kind of man who seemed immune to misfortune. In a region that lived and died by weather, his fields bloomed when others withered. His cotton grew thick and luminous, the bolls white as bone, untouched by the blight that crippled neighboring plantations. Men said he had a gift for timing rain, that his prayers reached further than theirs. Women whispered that his calm voice could still the air itself. When storms rolled over the Mississippi, lightning would split in the sky, bending east or west, never striking the Aldridge land. To some, it was providence. To others, something older and less merciful. He was not born to wealth. Records trace him to a small inheritance in Natchez, a father who died young, and a mother remembered only for her mirror, an heirloom said to have been brought from overseas, silver-backed and cold to the touch. Silas studied briefly in New Orleans, learned Greek, Latin, scripture, and then returned to Mississippi, a man remade, measured, meticulous, and hauntingly composed. Those who met him remembered his stillness first, then his eyes, the pale gray of smoke before rain. He never raised his voice. He never hurried, yet when he entered a room, conversation faltered. His estate rose quickly, acres of fertile ground carved from what had been swamp and thorn. He hired few hands, yet harvests came early, heavy, and clean. Even his overseers found little to do. The earth obeys him, one was rumored to say, like it knows his name. Silas attended church without fail, sitting in the third pew, hands folded, his expression serene. He donated generously, but never ostentatiously. When asked about his success, he would smile faintly and quote scripture, something about labor rewarded and the righteous prospering. But the neighbors talked. They said his first wife, Eliza, had brought him luck, and when she disappeared, the luck did not falter, it deepened. They noticed how he never remarried in haste, how each wedding came after a storm, how the new bride's arrival was followed by another season of impossible abundance. Some called it blessing. Others called it bargain. His slaves whispered of lights moving through the fields at night, of voices from the house when only one lived there. They said the soil behind the manor was too soft, too freshly turned, though no graves were marked. By 1859, Silas Aldridge was known as the Cotton Baron who never sweats. His ledger never dipped, his house never darkened. He hosted suppers where laughter lingered only while he spoke. Guests left uneasy, unable to name why, and when they passed his fields on the ride home, they swore the cotton seemed to move even without wind bending ever so slightly toward the house on the hill. The earliest name on the record was Eliza Thorne Aldridge, though no one could agree where she came from. Some said Tennessee, others Virginia. A few claimed she was from nowhere at all. A woman who appeared suddenly one spring afternoon at Silas's side, pale and polite, as if conjured rather than courted. The marriage announcement in the Times Vicksburg Gazette Times was brief, a single line noting the union of Mr. Silas Aldridge, gentleman of distinction, to Miss Eliza Thorne, late of Natchez. No family attended, no witnesses signed the license. Within days, she was mistress of the Aldridge estate, walking the balcony at dusk, her white dress catching the dim light like frost. The first months of their marriage seemed unremarkable. Silas was attentive, Eliza demure, and the plantation thrived more than ever. Visitors described her as soft-spoken, devout, and almost unnervingly calm. Yet there were peculiarities that no one spoke of directly. The servants said she rarely ate. They brought trays of food to her chambers and found them untouched, save for the glass of water emptied each night. Others claimed she could be heard talking softly when she was alone, her voice lilting in a rhythm like prayer, but in no language they knew. And in the parlor, the great mirror Silas had inherited from his mother was always veiled except on Sundays, when Eliza was seen standing before it for hours, motionless, as though studying her reflection for flaws invisible to the rest. That winter was colder than most. Ice glazed the trees and the river rose, turning fields to silver marsh. It was during that season that Eliza fell ill, or so Silas said. He sent word to the parish that she had taken to bed with fever, that she slept often and spoke little. None were allowed to see her. When asked if the doctor had called, he replied gently, "The Lord will provide what medicine she needs." Weeks passed, and the neighbors grew uneasy. Then, without notice, Silas appeared at Sunday service alone. His expression was solemn but untroubled. When asked after his wife, he answered simply, "She has gone to rest." No funeral was held, no grave was dug in the family plot. The only evidence of her passing was a portrait that appeared on the mantel the following week. Eliza in her wedding dress, her eyes glimmering with unnatural clarity, her lips caught in the faintest suggestion of breath. Visitors found themselves unable to look at it for long. In certain light, her expression seemed to change, softening as though aware of being watched. Silas never spoke of her again. But the servants whispered that on cold nights, the veil would slip from the mirror, and in its glass, a woman stood behind his shoulder, her reflection clearer than his own. The only first-hand account from within the Aldridge estate came from a man named Josiah Green, a house servant who vanished one humid night in the summer of 1861. For months, it was believed he had drowned crossing the Yazoo, until word reached Vicksburg that he had surfaced in New Orleans, giving statements to abolitionists documenting the horrors of plantation life. His testimony was published in fragments, a few paragraphs in a northern pamphlet buried among broader accounts of cruelty and escape. Yet one section stood apart, strange even by the standards of the time. In it, Josiah spoke not of lash or labor, but of something the human mind was never meant to witness. He claimed there was a room beneath the house. Hidden behind the cellar wall, sealed except when the master entered. It had no windows, only a single lamp that burned without smoke, and the air inside was thick with a smell like iron and vinegar. He went down there often, Josiah said. Always when the moon was full, always carrying a little glass mirror and a bowl. The other servants avoided the cellar altogether. For they said strange noises rose through the floorboards on those nights, a humming that wasn't quite human, a rhythm like breathing caught between laughter and prayer. Josiah's testimony mentioned a woman, too, a white lady who never seemed to die. He described seeing her at dawn, walking the upper balcony long after Mrs. Eliza was said to be dead and buried. Her face, he said, was the same as the picture in the parlor, but her eyes were wrong. They were like looking into water. She never spoke, never blinked, but she would turn her head as he passed, her expression patient, almost kind. It was her voice I heard under the house, he told the abolitionists, but she was upstairs at the same time. When asked to explain, Josiah fell silent, then said only, "There were two of her. One living, one waiting." The abolitionist who recorded his words dismissed them as the fevered ramblings of a man scarred by captivity. His printed statement ended abruptly, followed by a note, asterisk, "The witness was visibly shaken and refused further questions." Asterisk Josiah's fate, after that, remains unknown. Some said he joined the Union lines and died in service. Others claimed he disappeared again, this time without trace, yet his story lingered. Decades later, when the house fell into ruin and new investigators entered its cellar, they found the bricks of one wall newer than the rest mortared smooth, as if sealing something in rather than keeping intruders out. And behind that wall, faintly, the sound of dripping, steady as breath. The parlor of the Aldridge house was a place of deliberate beauty. Polished wood, tall windows, a chandelier that threw soft amber light across ivory walls. But it was the mirror that commanded attention, an enormous, silver-backed thing that spanned nearly an entire wall, framed in carved roses blackened with age. No one remembered where Silas had acquired it. Some said it had come from France, others whispered older origins, carried from across the ocean by his mother. Whatever its provenance, every visitor to the house understood it was not an ornament. It was the room's true master. Ordinarily, the mirror was hidden beneath a heavy black drape that reached the floor. Servants were forbidden to touch it, even to dust its frame. It was uncovered only on one occasion, the night of each Aldridge wedding. Guests described the ritual as elegant, even tender. Silas would lead his bride into the parlor after the vows, draw the curtain aside with both hands, and together they would stand before the glass. To see oneself joined, he would say in his calm, measured voice. To be bound not in reflection, but in truth. Those who attended spoke of the ceremony with a discomfort they could never quite name. For when the curtain fell away, something in the light shifted. The air seemed thicker, colder, as though the mirror had inhaled. One guest, a cousin from Natchez, recalled the wedding of Silas's third wife, Lisbeth. When they stood before the mirror, she wrote in a letter years later, I saw them both twice. Not as a trick of angle, but as though there were two sets of them, one living and one waiting behind the glass. She claimed that Silas smiled faintly at this and whispered to his bride, Do you see? The woman nodded once, her expression unreadable. Afterward, the mirror was covered again, and the house returned to its careful quiet. Servants told darker stories. They said the drape sometimes shifted when no wind blew, that late at night, faint breathing could be heard from behind it. Some swore that when lightning struck nearby, the black cloth glowed faintly from within, as if something bright pressed close to the other side. One maid who dared to peek beneath it was said to have gone blind within a month, her last words a whisper of faces upon faces. Silas spoke of the mirror only once. To a visiting clergyman who praised its craftsmanship, he replied, It's not the silver that holds the image, it's what's willing to stay. After that, no guest remarked on it again. Years later, when the house stood empty and the drape rotted away, the glass beneath was found unbroken, gleaming, and cold. And in its reflection, the parlor appeared perfectly preserved, two figures standing within, waiting patiently for the curtain to fall once more. The third wife came to the Aldridge estate in the spring of 1864, when the war had swallowed Mississippi whole. Her name was Lisbeth though no one could say where Silas found her. She arrived one morning in a pale carriage drawn by horses too fine for wartime, wearing a veil that reached to her fingertips. The few neighbors who saw her swore she was beautiful, but in a way that left the air unsettled. Her skin was too even, her eyes too still, her posture too perfect, as if she had been sculpted rather than born. She smiled politely to those who greeted her, though her expression never changed, even when laughter rippled around her. A quiet woman, Silas told the parishioners when they asked. Made delicate by God's design. The housekeeper, Mrs. Penner, was the first to notice the oddity. She said Lisbeth's footsteps made no sound on the wood floors, even in shoes that should have creaked. She slept little, ate less, and preferred to sit for hours before the draped mirror in the parlor, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on the cloth as though waiting for it to move. The servants avoided her room after dark, whispering that she hummed without melody, her voice soft and low like a tune half remembered. One evening, during supper, a wine glass shattered in Lisbeth's hand. The cut was deep, slicing across her palm, but no blood came forth, only a faint, colorless fluid that glimmered briefly before vanishing. She stared at the wound, without flinching. Silas rose immediately, his face calm, and dismissed the servants. It is nothing, he said. Her constitution is not as yours. But word traveled quickly. The doctor from town, a cautious man named Harlan Rowe arrived the next morning at the insistence of a curious neighbor. He examined Lisbeth's hand in silence. Her pulse was slow, so faint he could not count it. Her skin was cool, but not cold. When he pricked her finger, she did not wince, and again there was no blood, only a trace of that pale shimmer, vanishing almost before it could be seen. The doctor's expression changed as he leaned closer. Whatever he saw made him step back so suddenly that his chair struck the wall. Silas's voice followed, low and steady. "You've seen what you came to see, doctor. Speak of it, and you will not see another dawn." Dr. Rowe left without a word. His horse was found still tethered outside the next morning, reins trailing in the mud. He was never seen again. Silas told those who asked that the man had taken ill and departed north for safety. As for Lisbeth, she bore no mark from the glass, her hand smooth as ever, the wound erased as if it had never been. She continued to move through the house with that same soundless grace, her eyes fixed on the mirror in the parlor, waiting for something only she and Silas seemed to know was coming. When the war reached Mississippi, it moved like fire, slow, devouring, relentless. Plantations burned, bridges fell, and men vanished into fields that turned red with mud and blood. Yet through it all, the Aldridge estate remained untouched. Soldiers spoke of it in campfire whispers, calling at times the spared house asterisk. Both Union and Confederate forces marched within sight of its gates, yet none crossed the threshold. Scouts reported seeing lights burning inside when the rest of the countryside had gone dark, and the faint sound of a piano drifting through the night, though no one claimed to hear it twice. One Confederate lieutenant, Thomas Avery, recorded in his diary that he and his men approached the property seeking shelter from rain. The house stood silent, its shutters drawn, the fields unharvested but strangely immaculate. He noted the feeling of being watched, the hairs on his arms lifting though no figure appeared in the windows. As they neared the porch, a woman stepped into view, pale, motionless, her face calm, her hands clasped before her. She did not speak. She did not move. Avery called out, asking if she needed help, but she only tilted her head slightly, as if listening for something far away. His men urged him to leave. When he looked away for an instant, she was gone. Months later, Union soldiers told nearly the same story. Their regiment had been foraging north of Vicksburg when they passed the Aldridge property. They found it eerily intact, no scorch marks, no signs of looting, the cotton rows still standing as if the harvest had never been interrupted. One soldier described feeling as though the very air warned us to turn back. Another wrote of the same woman on the porch, her white dress unstained by rain or dust, her eyes reflecting the lantern light but showing no pupils at all. They fired a warning shot toward the house, but the sound seemed to die before reaching the walls. The next morning, the plantation was gone from their maps, replaced by empty marshland. When local men returned after the war, they found the Aldridge estate exactly as it had been before, untouched, unaged. The porch boards were dry, the fields green, and the house stood as though no soldier had ever walked its road. But it was the woman who unsettled them most. Neighbors said she was seen again, standing on the porch, her stillness perfect, her face identical to the one painted in the parlor years before. She did not wave. She did not beckon. She only watched, the same faint tilt of the head, as if waiting for the next war to pass her by. When peace finally returned to Mississippi, the Aldridge estate opened its doors once more. The war had starved the land, yet the Aldridge fields seemed untouched, lush, unbroken, impossibly green. It was around that time that a traveling portraitist named Ezra Klein came through Vicksburg, offering his services to those who still had money to spare. He painted widows, magistrates, and soldiers' wives, and his reputation for precision earned him an invitation few would have accepted. A commission from Silas Aldridge, himself. Ezra arrived at the estate one fog-thick morning in 1867. The house looked as if it had been sealed off from time. The windows were spotless, the grounds immaculate. Silas greeted him with the same reserved courtesy that people remembered from before the war, a voice that carried warmth but no real welcome. "You'll be painting my wife," Silas said, leading him into the parlor. The draped mirror loomed behind the easel that had already been prepared. The woman who entered a moment later took Ezra's breath away. Her name, Silas said, was Elise. She was young, perhaps no more than 20, but her stillness gave her the bearing of someone carved from marble. Her complexion was flawless, her features symmetrical in a way that unsettled rather than pleased. "You will paint her exactly as you see her," Silas instructed. Ezra nodded, though his brush hand trembled. Days passed in uneasy quiet. The woman rarely spoke, rarely blinked. At times, when Ezra looked up from his palette, she seemed not to be breathing at all. He painted with care, layering color upon color, trying to capture the strange light of her eyes. When he finished, the portrait was perfect, too perfect. He felt pride for a moment, then a ripple of dread. The face on the canvas looked familiar, though he could not say why. 2 years later, in Natchez, another commission came from Aldridge, a different address, a different wife. Ezra hesitated, but accepted, curiosity outweighing caution. When the new bride entered, he froze. The same woman, the same face, the same eyes, even the same faint scar above the lip that he had painted before. Silas said nothing, only watched him work. Ezra began comparing sketches in secret, measuring features with string and calipers. Each face aligned perfectly: nose, eyes, mouth, distance between pupils identical to the millimeter. It was mathematically impossible. When he brought his findings to Silas, the man only smiled, reached into his coat, and placed a roll of money on the table. "You are an artist," he said softly. "Not a prophet." Ezra took the money but left that night, unable to sleep beneath that roof another hour. Years later, he would tell a fellow painter that he still dreamed of that house, of a dozen women standing behind him as he worked, each one wearing the same expression. And sometimes, he swore, he could feel them breathing not in the room, but from within the portraits themselves, waiting for the next brushstroke to bring them back. The journal appeared by chance, unearthed from the back of a cedar wardrobe during the estate sale of a long-dead family in Natchez. Its leather binding was cracked, the ink browned to the color of tea, yet the handwriting remained steady, deliberate. The cover bore no name, only the initials **MH***. Inside, on the first page, was written, "To whomever finds this, I record the truth so that it may not die with me." The author was Margaret Hale, a widow of modest means. Her words began plainly enough entries about weather, neighbors, and grief. But halfway through the journal, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew tighter, the margins filled with restless notes. The first mention of her sister appeared there. Eliza has written again. She says she is to be married. The man promises her eternity. Margaret's entries painted a portrait of deep unease. Eliza Thorne, her younger sister, had vanished from Natchez in the spring of 1842 after announcing her engagement to a man named Silas Aldridge, a gentleman of wealth and education who had courted her for only 2 weeks. "He is handsome but quiet," Eliza had written in her final letter. "When he speaks, I feel time stop. He says he can make me eternal." That phrase haunted Margaret. She wrote of sleepless nights, of dreams where her sister's voice echoed from behind glass. "She calls to me," Margaret recorded, "but I cannot see her, only my own reflection answering back." Months passed with no further letters. When Margaret inquired at the Aldridge estate, she received a polite note in return. Mrs. Aldridge regrets that travel is not possible at this time. She sends her love. Asterisk. The handwriting was not Eliza's. Rumor reached Natchez that the new Mrs. Aldridge had fallen ill, then died before the year's end, though no death notice was printed. Margaret tried to visit again, but the roads to Vicksburg were flooded. She wrote, asterisk, "The Lord does not wish me to find her, or perhaps he cannot bear for me to see what remains." Asterisk. The journal's final entries grew erratic, looping, nearly illegible. Margaret wrote of hearing a knock at her door one night in 1843. When she opened it, no one stood there, but on the step lay a small mirror, its silver backing tarnished, its surface faintly rippled. She ended with a single line. Asterisk. "I saw her face in the glass, not as memory, but as presence. He has kept his promise. Eternity is not mercy." Asterisk. When the diary reached the hands of the Vicksburg archivist a century later, the mirror mentioned within it was long gone. But pressed between the pages of the final entry was a small scrap of cloth, stained faintly gray, smelling faintly of iron and salt, as though time itself had failed to dry what once bled beneath. The Aldridge cellar was already a place few dared to enter. Damp air hung heavy beneath the floorboards, and the scent of old ash and mildew clung to the brick. The house, abandoned for decades by then, had grown silent in a way that felt watchful. Yet the silence was never complete. Visitors to the ruins claimed that if one descended the cellar steps at night, the quiet trembled faint, like breath caught behind a wall. It was that wall that gave rise to the legend. Beneath the main cellar, townsfolk said, lay a second chamber, hidden, sealed in haste after the disappearance of the final Mrs. Aldridge. The story persisted in whispers long after the family name vanished from polite conversation. It was said that Silas had ordered new bricks delivered a week before his death, though no renovations were ever recorded. The masons who accepted the work were never identified by name, only remembered as two men who didn't stay long. They were seen leaving the property at dawn, pale and wordless, refusing the gold they'd been promised. One of them, years later in a Vicksburg tavern, drunkenly muttered that he could still hear voices behind the stone, soft as women praying. When the property changed hands in 1903, the new owner, a cotton merchant named Broderick Ames, hired a crew to restore the cellar. His intention was simple: to turn the house into a storage facility for bales and tools. The men arrived with lanterns, shovels, and an easy confidence. By noon, they had cleared the upper cellar, uncovering tools, broken bottles, and the rusted remnants of what might have been a mirror frame. Then one worker struck his pick against a section of the far wall and felt a hollow echo. They pressed their ears against the bricks and swore they heard a faint murmur from within, words indistinct, rhythmic, like someone whispering a prayer through a closed door. Ames ordered them to break through, but none obeyed. One man vomited. Another dropped his lantern, shattering glass across the stone. The youngest fled up the stairs, refusing even to collect his wages. By dusk, the house stood empty again. The next morning, Ames found the wall untouched but for a single new crack running through the mortar, as though something inside had pressed outward during the night. No one tried again. The cellar was resealed, the entrance padlocked, and in time, the house above collapsed into ruin. But those who live near the property still claim that after heavy rain, when the ground softens and the air fills with the smell of wet brick, you can hear it whispers rising faintly through the soil. Not cries, not screams, but words murmured in unison, the cadence of vows repeated again and again. And if you listen closely, between the echoes, you can almost make out a man's voice saying, asterisk, till death, and after, asterisk. The storm that ended the Aldridge line came without warning. The night of June 14th, 1879, began in stillness, air so heavy that even the crickets fell quiet. The sky above Vicksburg sagged under a lid of bruised cloud, and the first rumble of thunder rolled through the valley like something waking from long sleep. Neighbors along the road to the Aldridge estate later said they saw the old house lit up by flashes, each one throwing its silhouette against the hills like a black cathedral. Inside that house, somewhere in the depths of its parlor, Silas Aldridge was not sleeping. He had grown gaunt by then, his hair shot with white, his voice seldom heard. Elise, the 12th wife, was rarely seen. Those who caught glimpses of her in the garden said she moved as though her limbs were being guided by someone else's memory. Her face, like all the others, was young, perfect, and unchanging. The parish no longer called. Even the bravest had stopped visiting after one guest claimed to see two silhouettes moving inside the parlor window, neither matching the height of Silas. At 9:30, lightning split the sky and struck the iron weather vane atop the roof. The sound was said to have been unlike thunder, more like the tearing of fabric too large to see. The blast threw sparks through the chimney and set fire to the drapes in the main hall. When the storm subsided, the house stood unburned, but changed. Its windows had gone black, and smoke leaked from the seams of the walls. In the morning, a farmer named Gerald Pike ventured inside. He found Silas in the parlor, lying before the great silver mirror that had hung covered for decades. The drape was gone, the frame cracked, and the glass scattered across the floor in 1,000 pieces. Silas's body was twisted, his eyes open, his reflection shattered into fragments around him. No wound marked him, yet his skin had turned pale as ash. Elise was nowhere to be found. Only her footprints remained, trailing from the parlor to the open front door, each one lighter than the last as if she had been fading with every step. Pike gathered what courage he could and examined the shards. In each piece of glass, he saw not his own reflection, but many faces. Some were women, all identical, all staring back. When he counted, there were 13, not 12. One face, unlike the rest, was unmistakably Silas's. The farmer dropped the fragment and fled, swearing he could still hear a woman's laughter echoing faintly from within the broken mirror. That night, the storm returned, though no rain fell. Lightning flickered across the hills, illuminating the Aldridge house in brief, merciless flashes. Each time the light struck the shattered parlor window, something within seemed to move, as if the reflections had never accepted their breaking and were waiting for someone to piece them back together. When the storm passed and the smoke cleared, they carried Silas Aldridge from his house in silence. The coroner, a man accustomed to ruin, found himself unsettled before even crossing the threshold. The air inside was wrong, sweet, metallic, and still. Silas lay in the parlor where the mirror had once stood, his body resting on the scorched wood floor. His eyes were open, glassy but alert, as if watching those who entered. There was no sign of violence, no burns, no bruising, only stillness, like a painting that refused to fade. The coroner recorded that the skin showed no deterioration of tissue, despite the Mississippi heat. The flesh was cool, smooth, and faintly luminous under the lantern's glow. He pressed a finger to Silas's wrist, expecting the slackness of death, but the skin gave slightly, elastic, responsive, almost living. He pulled his hand back quickly, muttering that the man felt kept. He sealed the report without signing it. When the undertaker arrived the next morning, he entered alone and emerged moments later pale and trembling. "He's watching me," he whispered, refusing to prepare the body. When pressed, he explained that Aldridge's eyes were not fixed in the way of corpses. They followed him across the room. The pupils seemed to shift, narrowing as the light changed. No one believed him until another man, summoned to help with the burial, swore the same. Together they nailed the coffin shut before dusk and took it to the family plot behind the overgrown cotton fields. There was no service, no hymn, only the sound of shovels against soil. The sky that evening was unnaturally clear, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and static. When the last shovelful fell, one of the men glanced toward the house and swore he saw a figure standing in the parlor window, tall, motionless, framed by moonlight. He said nothing. They left quickly, not daring to look back. 3 weeks later, a storm rolled through the valley again, uprooting trees and flooding the road to the Aldridge estate. When it passed, the caretaker who tended the grounds found the earth above Silas's grave disturbed. The coffin lay exposed, the lid splintered open from within. Inside, there was nothing. Only the faint impression of a body, pressed into the lining like a shadow burned into fabric. The caretaker stumbled backward, certain the wind had shifted, though the air was still. That night, lights were seen in the parlor window, again, brief, pale, and flickering like reflections searching for a surface. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread through Vicksburg that Silas Aldridge had not stayed buried. Some said he walked the grounds at dusk, his skin bright in the moonlight, unblemished, ageless. Others swore they saw him at the edge of the river, gazing into the black water as if it were another mirror waiting to be broken. The letters were discovered by accident in the archives of a defunct law office in Vicksburg, yellowed pages bound by ribbon, tucked inside a ledger that had not been opened in a century. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, the ink faded to rust. At first glance, the contents appeared to be a gentleman's correspondence, affectionate salutations, mentions of weather and estate affairs. But the longer one read, the less ordinary they became. Each letter was signed by Silas Aldridge. None were addressed to a living name. The recipient was simply marked as Times My Constant, asterisk. The earliest dated letter, from 1841, reads almost tenderly. Silas speaks of a woman whose face refuses to dim with time, and of his belief that memory could be preserved not through portraits or prayer, but through the method. By the next letter, his tone sharpens, becoming clinical, filled with diagrams and strange terminology. He writes of mirrors polished with mercury, of reflections trapped before the soul recognizes the separation. He claims success after months of trial, boasting that the image remains awake when the original sleeps. Archivists who studied the documents noted that the letters oscillate between confession and experiment. One begins as a love note. My dearest, you do not know how many times I have met you for the first time, and ends like a scientific report detailing application of the tincture and the final sealing within glass. Another mentions the binding of reflections, a process involving equal exchange between vessel and viewer. It was in that passage that the name first appears. Asterisk Eliza, asterisk. She was the first, Silas wrote, and she was perfect. The others only bring her closer. By the time of the later letters, his handwriting had grown unstable, the ink pressed deeper into the paper as if carved rather than written. He refers to himself not as husband, but as collector. He speaks of a dozen iterations, each with the same eyes, the same voice, the same gentle submission when the mirror accepts her. He claims he can sense when the reflection weakens, when the tether frays and must be renewed. The final letter is dated a month before his death. It is brief, almost serene. Each one returns the same, he wrote. Though I begin again, the face never forgets. Even when the vessel cracks, she waits within the silver. Beneath the signature is a faint imprint, a smear shaped like a fingerprint, darkened not by ink but by something that looks like mercury tarnish. The letters were catalogued under Time's Miscellaneous Spiritualism, 19th century, asterisk, but the archivist who handled them refused to store them near the building's mirrors. When asked why, she said the reflection in her reading glass had lingered a heartbeat too long after she looked away, as though something inside the page had noticed her, and was beginning, once again, to remember. The tintype was discovered in a trunk purchased from an estate auction in New Orleans, an unremarkable piece of history among yellowed linens and rusted brooches. It would have gone unnoticed if not for the label scratched faintly into the metal's back, asterisk asterisk, Mrs. Aldridge, 1889. Asterisk asterisk. The buyer, a collector of period photographs, recognized the name from local folklore. At first, he assumed it to be a reproduction, another relic of myth. But when he lifted it toward the lamplight, his breath caught. The face staring back was the same woman preserved in every other Aldridge portrait spanning 50 years. The same pale skin, same parted lips, same unyielding calm. Not older, not younger. Exactly the same. Yet this one was wrong. The earlier images showed the familiar setting of the Aldridge estate parlors, verandas, the faint blur of cotton fields. This photograph bore none of that. The background revealed a city street lined with gas lamps and brick facades, unmistakably New Orleans, decades after the plantation had fallen to ruin. The woman stood in the center of the frame, her gloved hands clasped before her waist. Her dress was modest but anachronistic, its style belonging to another age entirely. And though the photographer had caught her mid-breath something human, almost tender, her eyes were fixed squarely on the lens, as if she had been waiting for it. When the collector brought the plate to a photographic historian, she noted something stranger still. The negative bore faint double exposure, but not in the expected places. Behind the figure of the woman, barely visible, was another image, superimposed columns, perhaps, or archways. When enhanced under light, they resembled the parlor of the old Aldridge house. The woman appeared to stand in both spaces at once, city street and vanished home, the living world and whatever lay beneath it. Word spread quickly among archivists. Some dismissed it as coincidence, others as forgery, but a few who had studied the earlier portraits insisted it was genuine. The face matched precisely the distance between pupils, the angle of the jaw, even the faint scar along the collarbone recorded in 1863 tintype. Every measurement identical. Yet no woman by the name Aldridge, or any variation of Eliza, Elise, or Lisbeth, was recorded living in New Orleans in 1889. The collector kept the tintype on his desk for months, unable to part with it. He claimed that sometimes, under lamplight, the reflection in the glass would flicker, that the background seemed to shift, as though the street behind her darkened into the outlines of trees and a wide, glass, empty porch. On more than one night, he awoke to find the photograph turned face down, though no one else had entered the room. When he died in 1893, the tintype was missing. His family searched the house, but found only a single shard of metal near the mirror above his writing table. Etched faintly into it, almost invisible, was a woman's face, half-formed, eyes dark, unblinking, waiting for the rest of herself to return. By 1932, the Aldridge estate was nothing more than a husk of its former grandeur. The house had collapsed into itself, leaving only a scorched foundation and the skeletal remains of chimneys jutting up from the soil like monuments to something best forgotten. Kudzu strangled the porch posts, and the road to the property had long since vanished beneath swamp reeds. But history, like the dead, is rarely content to stay buried. It was curiosity academic at first that drew Dr. Evelyn Marrow, from Jackson to Vicksburg, carrying a notebook, a small camera, and an obsession with the legend of the 12 Wives. She was a historian by title, though her interest drifted toward the supernatural. Her field notes show a mixture of scholarship and belief, a mind torn between reason and reverence. The Aldridge myth, she wrote in her first entry, is less about the wives than about the mirrors they inhabited. Reflection as resurrection, a Southern theology of the self. The locals warned her not to linger after dusk, claiming the soil still whispered. She smiled politely, noting the comment with a detached academic air, yet she admitted in the margin, the air here feels watched. Evelyn spent 3 days among the ruins. On the first, she mapped what remained of the cellar and uncovered a layer of blackened brick that suggested a second foundation. On the second day, she unearthed small shards of what looked like glass, edges dulled by time, their backs flecked with silver residue. The pieces reflected oddly too vividly, as though they remembered light from another age. She wrapped them carefully in cloth, labeling each fragment with trembling hands. Her final entry that evening describes the discovery of a seam in the earth that hums faintly when touched. The third day's notes are less coherent. The handwriting shakes, lines crossing through each other as if written in haste. Asterisk. I heard something below. Asterisk, she scrawled. Asterisk. Not wind, not echo. It spoke in rhythm 12, perhaps 13 voices. Asterisk, beneath that, another entry written at dusk. Asterisk. One shard shows my face only when I move. When still, it shows another. Her eyes open first. Asterisk. The last page bears a single line in darker ink. Asterisk. The reflection moved before I did. Asterisk. Then nothing. No date, no closure. When a search party arrived weeks later, they found her car at the edge of the property, door ajar, key still in the ignition. Her camera contained one final photograph, a blurred image of broken ground where the parlor once stood. In the lower corner of the frame, faint and half caught by the flash, was the edge of a mirror fragment. Within it, a woman's face hovered in perfect focus, sharp, watching, impossibly familiar. Evelyn Marrow was never found. The fragments she collected were gone, though those who came after swore that, on moonlit nights, the soil near the ruins still glittered faintly, as if remembering the shape of what once reflected there. By the time genealogists traced the Aldridge bloodline into the 20th century, the name had thinned but never vanished. Scattered across Mississippi and Louisiana were families who claimed no relation to the plantation, no connection to Silas Aldridge or his wives, yet every record contradicted them. Property deeds from 1,857 bore signatures that matched later documents under new surnames: Aldrich, Alridge, Allen. The spelling changed, the lineage did not. Still, when questioned, each descendant responded the same way. Asterisk. There was no Silas. Asterisk. The researcher who led the inquiry, a quiet man named Peter Hollow, recorded his encounters with these families in a series of taped interviews. The earliest is uneventful polite denials, nervous laughter. But as the project continued, his notes grew strange. He describes one woman in Baton Rouge, an elderly matriarch whose parlor walls were lined with photographs of ancestors. When Hallow showed her a copy of the Aldridge portraits, she froze. The color drained from her face. "That's my grandmother," she said. "But it can't be. She was born in 1918. When pressed, she grew agitated, whispering, "We don't speak her name." Then she demanded he leave. Another descendant, a man in his 30s from Mobile, agreed to a DNA comparison but withdrew the next day, claiming the photographs had stirred something. Hallow noted that during the interview, the man's young daughter entered the room. She paused before the portraits and asked, "Why is there a picture of Mommy?" The resemblance was uncanny. Same eyes, same curve of the mouth, same stillness. As Hallow continued, patterns emerged. In each branch of the family, one daughter per generation bore that same face unchanged, ageless in a way that photographs could not explain. They were called by different names: Eliza, Elise, Liza, Lisbeth, but each variation echoed the first. None of them spoke of the Aldridge house, though several admitted to dreams of mirrors, of being watched by their own reflections. One woman confessed to covering every mirror in her home after waking to find her image smiling when she was not. When Hallow presented his findings to the family at large, the reaction was swift and hostile. Letters arrived demanding he destroy his research. One was unsigned, written in a looping, elegant hand. It read, asterisk, "The method was never meant for outsiders. Stop looking before you see her. Asterisk." Months later, Hallow's work was abruptly discontinued. The recordings vanished from the university archive, and his name quietly disappeared from faculty listings. The families resumed their silence, though the whispers persisted. In Vicksburg, locals still claim to see women who bear that same face walking the cemetery path at dusk, pausing before the empty grave marked only with a weathered stone. No inscription remains, just a faint impression where words once were. Some say it read times Mrs. Aldridge, asterisk. Others insist it was blank, waiting for the next name to be written. The discovery came during a routine restoration of the Vicksburg courthouse archives in the summer of 1984. For decades, the basement vault had remained sealed beneath layers of dust, its air thick with the scent of mildew and paper rot. Archivists cataloging land deeds and probate ledgers came across an old oak filing cabinet whose lowest drawer refused to open. When the lock was finally pried loose, a metallic smell drifted out, sharp, sweet, almost medicinal. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in aged linen, its edges darkened by time. The cloth, when unrolled, revealed 12 tintype photographs and a single fragment of mirror glass about the size of a human hand. Each tintype was labeled the same way, in the same looping script. Asterisk, Mrs. Aldridge. Asterisk, beneath each name was a date, ranging from 1842 to 1879. The faces were identical. 12 women, 12 expressions, each caught in the same posture, chin slightly lifted, eyes forward, lips closed in that faint, knowing curve. The linen they had been wrapped in was streaked with a dull gray residue, and when touched, it left a fine silver film on the fingertips. The mirror shard was placed at the center of the bundle like a relic, its backing nearly gone, its surface warped but intact enough to reflect light. The lead archivist, a woman named Clara Jenkins, documented everything meticulously. She noted that the mirror fragment, when examined under direct light, seemed to hold depth beyond its surface, like looking into a shallow pool under moonlight. To photograph the shard for record, she positioned a lamp beside her camera and leaned close to frame the shot. That's when she froze. The reflection in the glass was not hers. The face staring back was female, dark hair pinned, eyes wide, unblinking. Clara turned, expecting a coworker behind her, but the room was empty. When she looked again, the face remained, though now the mouth had parted slightly, as if mid-breath. The photograph she captured seconds later became the most unsettling evidence of the find. When developed, the image showed no sign of Clara, nor of the lamp, nor the camera. Only the mirror shard dominating the frame, and within it, a single figure in 19th-century dress, staring outward with an expression that hovered between sorrow and recognition. The fragment silver backing seemed to shimmer, forming faint outlines behind her 12 others, blurred, half-seen, as though pressing forward. The tintypes and the shard were sealed again, labeled for forensic preservation, and locked in a temperature-controlled vault. Yet, staff who worked near the archive afterward complained of strange reflections in the metal shelving, as though someone were standing behind them just beyond the glass. Within a month, the courthouse installed blackout curtains over every reflective surface in the basement. The official record lists the Aldridge bundle as artifact of uncertain provenance. The unofficial whispers say that when the lights are out and the air grows still, a faint tapping can be heard from the vault door, rhythmic, deliberate, like knuckles against glass counting to 12. Every legend ends the same way, with the living trying to make sense of what refuses to die. The story of the Aldridge wives has endured for nearly 2 centuries, retold by preachers, skeptics, archivists, and the occasional traveler who swears the past still breathes in the Mississippi air. Each insists upon a different truth: that Silas Aldridge was a scholar who lost himself in his own pursuit of perfection, that his wives were victims of vanity or witchcraft, that mirrors remember more than we dare believe. But behind all interpretations, one fact remains: the face. The same face that returned 12 times in portrait, once in death, and countless times after, ageless, unyielding, watching. Historians treat the matter delicately, as though touching a wound that refuses to heal. To them, the Aldridge phenomenon is an accident of folklore, a story born from grief and superstition, a metaphor for the South's obsession with beauty and decay. Yet even among the rational, unease lingers. The records are too precise, the dates too far apart, the tintypes verified as authentic, their chemicals consistent with their claimed eras. No forger could have predicted those details decades before the technology to test them existed. The conclusion no one will publish aloud is whispered instead. Perhaps the photographs were not made of her, but by her. Locals speak differently. To them, the Aldridge woman is no relic, she is present. They claim she walks the reflective surfaces of the town, her image slipping like oil across water, appearing where light bends just so. Some say she favors the old courthouse, drawn to the locked vault beneath the west wing where the mirror shard rests, sealed in glass and linen. Custodians have reported soft tapping on the steel case at night, faint and rhythmic, as if someone inside is testing the barrier's strength. Others tell of seeing movement in the curtained mirrors, a ripple of shadow that lingers half a heartbeat too long. Theology has its own explanations. Ministers speak of Aldridge's pride, a man who sought to bind eternity by his own hand, mistaking reflection for soul. They say the curse lies not in her, but in the act itself. To trap a living image is to wound creation. And so she endures, not dead, not alive, but caught between glass and gaze, waiting for someone to look too long, to believe too deeply, to finish what Silas began. If you ever find yourself in Vicksburg, they will tell you where the courthouse stands: white columns, iron gates, windows draped in heavy cloth. The west wing is always dim, even in daylight. And though the janitors keep the mirrors covered, you may notice a thin line of light slipping beneath the fabric, silver as breath. Most visitors hurry past it, unwilling to see. But a few, those who linger, claim the glass stirs when the sun shifts, and that for a moment, something looks back. Not ghost, not woman. Only a reflection, patient and perfect, waiting for someone to remember her name.